Welcome to Shepherd's Coffee Talk. You know, of course, we have new legislation on marijuana, but there's lots and lots of questions about its use for older people and the medical use of marijuana.
Sure, and those of us who grew up in an era where marijuana was illegal until now have a very strange sort of connection with this whole idea. You always feel like, what if I get caught? So how do I even begin to discuss this in terms of a medical practice or a wellness practice? Because there is great application. That's why we invited Maddie Brown. She's a nurse and educator on this very subject to help us sort of unpack a little bit of how we can actually benefit with our health. And I understand women who can't sleep use CBD oil and maybe a little THC. I would never understand what that's all about. So where do we begin? Can you help us out?
Yeah, no, it's such an interesting industry because, like you say, October 17th, we legalized things within Canada. So the amount of people who were maybe interested in using cannabis before but weren't doing it because it had that kind of illegal stigma tied to it are all of a sudden like, oh, you know, I'll give that a shot now. Right. So much to the point that the Ontario cannabis stores were actually sold out in about 5 days of opening. So, you know, I don't think anyone was really prepared for how many people wanted to access cannabis, especially now that it's legal. Like you say, it doesn't have that stigma tied to it that many people in that age bracket kind of identify with. So cannabis has really, you know, hundreds of compounds, but there are two major ones that we talk about all the time. There's THC and there's CBD.
Okay, so let's define those two so we have more clarity.
So THC is the psychoactive component in cannabis. So it's going to be responsible for, you know, that high or psychoactive effect that lots of patients report when they feel it, or people kind of choose to use recreationally is that high or psychoactive effect. Now, medically, THC has been legal in Canada since 2001. It was actually first prescribed to HIV and AIDS patients. They had a really hard time eating, controlling their nausea and vomiting, so it actually really helped. THC is great for nerve pain, so specifically neuropathic, you know, spinal cord injuries, diabetic nerve pain, things like multiple sclerosis, and it's great for sleep as well as appetite.
So getting back to the application around nerves, what does it do in your body then to help?
Yeah, so cannabis actually, you know, I always tell people it's not just like 20-year-old boys who like being stoned. There's actually some science behind why it works. So everybody actually has what's called an endocannabinoid system. So it's a naturally occurring system. It's in people, it's in flora, it's in fauna. There's actually very few systems that don't have an endocannabinoid system. Actually, even if you've never smoked a joint in your life, you still have it. And it works like a lock and key. So you have this system, and when you introduce cannabis to your body, whether you ingest or inhale or apply it topically, it links up with those, you know, endocannabinoid receptors, and you get relief of a huge variety of ailments. So there's a huge amount of receptors in your central nervous system. That's why it's so effective for neuropathic pain or things like seizures, Parkinson's, because those are diseases that affect the neurological system.
Wow.
Yes.
This is powerful stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I guess
Life-changing for a lot of people.
For a lot of people, and I guess unless you were a person who had some of these issues and an open-minded doctor, you would not have a key to get into this world where you can find that relief, which to me is just a miracle, really. And so then let's continue on, because you talk about people with nerve issues. Who else can benefit from this?
Yeah, so THC, you know, that's the big thing, is we see people using it for nerve pain, so pain relief. We also see people using THC for sleep. THC is sedating, it can be relaxing, so patients who have insomnia, patients who are, you know, having a really hard time unwinding after a difficult shift, or they work nights, or they're on, you know, a shift work schedule, they have this substance that's able to kind of help them with the sleep process. So that's really important for people.
I want to add here too that we need to understand there's a scale for THC. So, you know, when I think of THC, all I think of is my youth when I used to smoke joints. Boom, like, I mean, you were sometimes sort of paralyzed, you couldn't move.
Yeah.
But there's a scale, so mixing CBD with just a little bit of THC gives you that relief or relaxation, but doesn't get you high.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So researchers now have, you know, lots and lots of documents and studies to reflect that when you do what's called a ratio dose, so, you know, let's say 5 milligrams of THC and 50 milligrams of CBD, so that would be like a 10-to-1 ratio, you get that nerve pain relief, you have some assistance with sleep, but the CBD actually cancels out some of that high effect. So people are, oh my God, I wasn't stoned compared to, if I just used THC, I was able to sleep, I wasn't totally out of it. So those ratio doses are actually just being sold as is. So you can buy oil that's equal parts THC and CBD. You can buy an oil that's those ratio doses, so 5-to-1 or 10-to-1. So people who are really hesitant or don't like that high feeling can have some relief, but without being totally stoned.
How do you know what to get for you?
It's really having that education, right? So if you're somebody who has nerve pain, you would hope that the person you're speaking with would know to refer you to something that has a high THC level. CBD, on the other hand, apart from being totally non-psychoactive, treats inflammatory pain. So any condition that ends with the word itis is associated with is associated with inflammation. So whether it's arthritis or appendicitis or tonsillitis, it just means inflammation of whatever body part or organ. So CBD, THC is strictly nerve pain, CBD is inflammatory pain. So patients with colitis or Crohn's disease, patients who have rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, where we see inflammation in the joints, things like that, it's hugely effective. And again, without that cognitively impairing factor, you have doctors and lawyers and truck drivers able to use it because they're not impaired.
It's not infected, right? Their mental capacity at that time.
Yeah.
And how do you do? Is this something that's topical? It's like an ointment, or you use
So,
a pill?
Right now, so the Ontario Cannabis Store, as well as the legal medical providers, so the Ontario Cannabis Store is for recreational patients. Medical patients get their cannabis right from the licensed producers. So examples of licensed producers would be places like Tweed or Colab or Aurora Hydropothecary in Quebec. Medical patients access their cannabis from there, but at the Ontario Cannabis Store, you can buy dried cannabis or oil. That's all they sell. They don't sell edibles or topicals. No. Those have not been regulated or legalized yet. So if you want those, it's kind of the burden of making it yourself, which a lot of people are doing and are quite happy to do. But I think that it's much more convenient for people to have them ready made. I have a few quadriplegic patients who literally cannot make edibles even if they wanted to, right? So it's not really fair for them to have to roll a joint or take a small bottle and use oil. That they can't do it without assistance. But if they had the ability to, pop a gummy bear or a pill in their mouth, that's more appealing. So it's making it more accessible for everybody as well.
And I guess we need to qualify too. This is in Ontario, so if you live in another province, the rules are a little different province to province.
Exactly.
So you need to make sure you know what's going on. This is it's just an endless discussion, Maddie.
Yeah.
So lastly, because I know a lot of women who watch Coffee Talk are challenged with sleeping at a certain point in life.
Yes.
Some women are challenged with menopause symptoms, and I understand that this also really is super helpful for women in menopause and beyond.
Yeah. So I was talking about CBD treating inflammation, but the other big thing that CBD does is helps to reduce anxiety, stress, or mood disorders. So because CBD is non-intoxicating and doesn't have that psychoactive property, when we have diseases where there's overactivity, so mood disorders where you're hyperactive and then extremely depressed, or anxiety where your mind is racing all the time, or PTSD where you're kind of always in that fight or flight state, because CBD calms overactivity, whether it's an overactive bowel and Crohn's disease or an overactive mind and anxiety, it seems to work for whichever one. So when people have trouble sleeping from anxiety or from stress, they're able to take that CBD and they're like, oh my God, I actually slept because I wasn't anxious.
Right.
So I think that plays a big part.
Now, where do people go now to? This is very informative.
To the store, Marlene.
But do they go to the doctor for this? If they are suffering from this, can their doctor help and prescribe this to them? And and give them some assistance, because I can imagine it's a little scary
Yes,
for
of
people
course.
who haven't
Yes.
haven't been in this marketplace looking for this
For
type
sure.
of thing.
Yeah, no, there's lots and lots of medical conditions that qualify for an actual prescription. So, anyone can wander into the recreational stores or order from the recreational site, but when you want a doctor or nurse alongside you to help make those decisions, or when you really want to know, okay, what should I take for menopause symptoms and trouble sleeping, having medical access to somebody who really knows the plant and the science and can talk about your medical interactions and pharmaceuticals is really
That's where
important.
they need the
Yeah.
confidence.
Yeah,
in that.
so-
It's medicine.
And our doctors,
Yeah.
are they aware of these, these
Yeah,
new?
I think doctors. So a big part of what I do is try to educate doctors, and again, not that they are unwilling to learn. They're not taught about it in school, so
Certainly,
you can't blame them for being hesitant to prescribe it. It's a hugely risky medication, but if they're willing to have the education, it makes them more comfortable. If they're not comfortable prescribing it, I have various clinics that I work with that have doctors on staff who will prescribe to patients with or without their doctor's kind of involvement.
Now, you said risky, so what does that mean? Why is it risky?
Because you know what, I think cannabis is often marketed as just like a feel-good, anyone can use it, there's no problem, no one dies from cannabis, and it is hugely different from alcohol. It's very different from opioids or your traditional pills or dangerous substances, but cannabis does interact with heart medication. It's not good for patients who have schizophrenia in their family. It's counterindicated, even CBD, with patients who are on blood thinners. It can actually make blood thinners stronger, which is not good.
No.
Right? So, everyone just kind of, I think, touts it as this, like, oh yeah, go for it. It's no big deal. But, it's not the end of the world. It's very, very unlikely that you would overdose or have any serious reaction, but it's totally possible to have a pretty lousy time. I get a few calls a week from people who've either ingested too much THC, or they haven't checked with their doctor or pharmacist before taking it with certain meds, and a lot of the time it's people who are really sick. So you should be consulting with somebody before experimenting with it, especially if you haven't used it in like 30 years.
Which I'm going to admit, after legalization, I did try.
Yeah.
I just had to put it down. I'm like,
Too strong,
Number one, I
or-
had to smoke it.
Yeah.
This is crazy. I
Yeah.
couldn't even get past that. So never mind. And then it was when you talk about the CBD THC level, there was just too much THC from my little body.
Yeah.
So I'm like, no, we're never doing that again.
Yeah.
But then it really made me curious, because when I have more information from what you've explained, and hopefully we can have more conversations about this, it made me realize maybe if there was less, I might enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it ends up being. I hear from these people who are like, oh my God, it was horrible. And I'm like, well, next time, instead of 3 gummies, have a third of a gummy, sir. And they, are like, oh my God, so I was actually able to sleep and I wasn't stoned the next day, right? So it's people experimenting with dosing, right? Because how much wine is appropriate to drink, or how much is an ounce of
Exactly.
liquor,
Good
right?
experience with that.
Exactly.
Cannabis is totally different.
Right.
It's very individual. So a big part of what I do is those one-on-one consults as well.
So one-on-one consults, if you need information,
anytime.
Maddie's your girl, your nurse, Nurse Maddie. Or if you have a group and you want some kind of presentation on this with questions and answers, this is Maddie's genius right here. You can tell today. So we would love it if you have questions. We'd like to invite Maddie back so we can keep this conversation going. Just put them in the comments below and we'll see where it takes us.
Great. Okay.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much,
Yeah,
Matt.
very
Very
much.
informative.
Really enjoyed it.
Lots
Enjoy
I
your day.
learned. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next Sunday.